Hey everyone! Before we continue learning how to use Photoshop, it's time for us to learn how to use our selection tools. Selection tools in Photoshop allow us to select specific areas of a photograph and then do things with them like delete them, move them, duplicate them, and perhaps even remove their background to add them to another photograph. The first thing I'm going to do before I begin is come to my background layer and unlock it. Then I'm going to come over to my toolbar. The three tools below your Move tool comprise all of your various selection tools. Before I explain what you can do with a selected area, I'm going to show you what each of these selection tools does and looks like, starting with our rectangular marquee. When I select rectangular marquee and come to my photograph, I'm going to click and drag my cursor around the subject that I would like to select. And when I release the cursor, I have marching ants in the shape of a rectangle around my object. To get rid of these marching ants so I can do anything else, I can right click and click deselect. If I come over to my next one, which is elliptical marquee, I can do the same thing. Drag the elliptical selection around my object and then release. When using the elliptical marquee, sometimes your selection isn't perfectly centered over your object or your subject. If you hover your mouse directly on top of the marching ants until you see the white arrow, you can click and drag that selection to get it positioned exactly where you need it, and then you can let go. I'm going to right click and deselect. I'm going to come down to my next batch of selection tools, which are my lasso tools. Traditional lasso allows you to free select an area of your photograph. So I'm going to come over to my photo and I'm going to click and hold the cursor as I draw a line around the subject I'm trying to select. And when I come back to my original point and let go, it will snap that new line around my subject. As you can see, this is a much closer selection than my marquee tools created. I'm going to right click and deselect. If I come to my polygonal lasso tool, this one works in straight lines and angles. You'll never be able to curve your polygonal lasso. But if you start anywhere by clicking once, letting go, and then dragging your cursor to the next spot and clicking again and again, as you can see, you can create a selection using nothing but sharp edged lines. And right click, deselect. Lastly, we have our magnetic lasso. This is actually one of my least favorite lasso tools because it doesn't work that well. And there are newer selection tools that work much more efficiently. But to use the magnetic lasso tool, you simply start by clicking one time anywhere on the object you're trying to select, let go, and then slowly drag your cursor around the outside edge of the subject you want to select. Photoshop is going to try and snap to the edge of that object. And to close your selection, simply come back and hover your cursor over your original anchor point. Click one time and let go, and then it will have your new selected area, which is a much closer selection than anything we've had before. However, especially in a photo like this, you're not going to get a perfect selection because it's not going to be able to find the edge of every little element of your photo. I'm going to right click and deselect. Lastly, we have our Object, Quick, and Magic Wand selection tools. I'm actually going to start at the bottom here with Magic Wand. This tends to work only when you're selecting an area that has the same color value. So when I click on Magic Wand and I come to an area of my project that has a consistent color, and I click one time, notice it's going to snap to the edge of that color only. Right click, come down here and deselect. If I were to come to the dog over here and maybe click on his pink tongue, notice it's going to try and find all the pink it can, but it's not going to do a very good job. Right click, again, deselect. This works the best when you have a photograph that has a solid color in it, like a white background or a black background, or when you click one time, you can select the entire area. If we come back to this tool and come to the middle one, Quick Selection Tool. This one works by clicking and holding the cursor and dragging the cursor through whatever part of the image you're trying to select, whether it is the subject itself or maybe the background area. You can continue to add to your selection by clicking and dragging the cursor. Again, this one works fairly well, but it oftentimes will add too much selection. In order to edit a selection, you can always come to your option bar at the top, and where you see the icon with the little minus sign next to your selection brush, you can come back in and remove an extra selection, or come to the plus sign and add a selection anywhere you want to add. And then you can come back to the primary and deselect. Lastly is our object selection tool. This one's the newest of the selection tools, and it works really well. However, it does tend to go slowly, and sometimes it will freeze our computer. So let's see what happens. I can come up and I can hover my mouse over the different areas of my photograph, and it's going to try and guess what I want to select. So if I want to select the dog and I hover my cursor over the dog, notice it has this pink area and it's going to show me the selection it will make. So when I click on that selection, notice it now has the marching ants around that edge. So now let's talk about what we can do when we have something selected. Okay. The first thing that we can do is delete that selection. So if we hit delete or backspace on our keyboard, we can actually remove the selected area. I'm going to go up to edit and undo to bring it back. We can also right click our selection and choose select the inverse. And what this does is it actually selects the outside of our selected space. And now if I were to hit delete or backspace on my keyboard, it would select the outside area, removing the background and leaving just the subject. Come up to edit and undo. I can also choose feather, which will create a soft focused edge around a selected area. So if I were to now, again, because I still have my inverted backdrop area selected, hit backspace or delete on my keyboard, notice it leaves, I'm going to right click deselect. Notice it leaves a feathery edge around my puppy dog. I come back to edit, undo again to bring it back. We'll right click, deselect. I'm going to come back up to my rectangular marquee tool and use this one now to drag a rectangle around my puppy dog. And then I'm going to hover my mouse over the marching ants until I see the white arrow, reposition it. Now I can also come in and right click this selection and choose free transform, which will allow me to shrink just my selected area. I can right click and I can choose content aware fill. And what it's going to try and do is remove the puppy and allow just the background to fill in. If I were to click apply and let go, you can see what it tries to do. I'm going to hit cancel, and then I'm going to hit edit, undo. So you can come in here and see how each of these options allow you to adjust a selected area. So instead of content aware fill, where it tries to replace my puppy dog with just the background, perhaps I want to fill it with my foreground color or my background color or a color of my choice. Lastly, what I can do is come to my Move tool. And with this selected space, I can hold down the Alt key and drag my image over to make a duplicate of it. Sorry, I just hit Control Z to undo that. Or I can hold down Control and hit J, and it actually duplicates that onto a brand new layer that you can see over on my layer panel. And with my Move tool selected, I can do the same thing, move him over, but now he's on a separate layer. Go ahead and delete that layer. So that is just a very basic introduction into each of our selection tools. Now, as you follow along in other tutorials and they ask you to make selections using one or more of these selection tools, you will know where to find them, how to use them, and what they'll do.